But first, I'm joined on set by former federal prosecutor and former Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy. Trey, always good to see you. Great to have you in New York tonight.
Thank you.
What do you think about the fact that places like the New York Times and the Rolling Stone are now essentially saying, you saw it, holy God, what a clown show this whole thing was?
2 years too late. They vilified Devin, they vilified Paul, they vilified Kash Patel, Johnny Ratcliffe. Those of us who for 2 years have been saying we like the Department of Justice. We need a good Department of Justice. But what they did in 2016 and 2017 is just wrong. So I don't know what report Comey read. This is the third IG report that has found his conduct to be substandard. If that's a victory lap, if he wants to take a victory lap because he's not indicted, more power to him. Don't write any more books on ethics. So don't tell me what the ethical standard is if you think this report vindicates you.
Yeah. You know, as I have followed this story very closely, covered it for years, there were things that I learned in the past couple of days looking at this report, and I know that you were privy to a lot of this before it all came out. But, you know, just to sort of put a fine point on some of this, right? You've got Carter Page, who was in the Navy, then was an asset for the CIA, sort of a peripheral asset who gave them information over time. They sort of had a relationship. He was traveling and doing a lot of foreign events and giving them some information. So the FBI says to the CIA, or to all the agencies, is this individual that we're looking at an asset of any of yours? And the CIA comes back and says, yeah, he's one of ours. They change it because they want to put a tail on this guy to not an asset of the CIA. I mean, that is a travesty. How does that happen?
Wrong people doing the wrong job. It is the most damning part that came out of Horowitz. I did not know that an FBI lawyer, someone that we give incredible powers and authorities and therefore corresponding responsibility to, would change someone's status. I mean, keep in mind, a counterintelligence investigation is because you think Carter Page is working on behalf of Russia. The reality is Carter Page was working on behalf of the United States of America, and you changed it from he is a source to he's not a source, which is a manifestly unfair thing to do to Carter Page. But so when Horowitz says there was no bias in the inception, there was no bias ab initio, there was a lot of bias from every point thereafter, including an FBI lawyer manufacturing evidence to get a surveillance warrant against an American citizen. Martha, that is not the FBI. I want your viewers to understand that is not the FBI that I worked with. It is not representative of 99.9% of the Bureau agents that I know, but they've got a problem. And if you're changing emails, manufacturing, altering evidence, which is a crime, because you want to get at somebody, you don't want them to be president of the United States, not only do you not have any business being an FBI agent or law enforcement, you probably ought to be wearing an orange jumpsuit.
I mean, the question is, why? Why would you change that? I mean, you know, even in the best case scenario, if you think, oh, maybe he's a double agent or something, aren't you going to sort of bring somebody in at the CIA and say, look, we're a little concerned about this guy? John Brennan was running the CIA at the time. Why didn't he reach out and protect his guy? Why didn't he say, hey, Carter Page, hold on. You're wrong about him. He's one of ours.
God knows he's on television enough. He's had ample opportunity when all these interviews he gives about Trump ought to be in the dustbin in history and how treasonous he is. It would have been nice for him to stick up and say, hey, y'all are doing surveillance right now, reading the emails, intercepting the phone calls of someone that actually is working for the country as opposed to against the country. It'd been nice if he'd spoken up. He also denied in a congressional hearing that the dossier was used in any court pleading. So, look, those are the moral authorities that the left is citing.
Yeah. You know, another question that I would have for Jim Comey, Chris Wallace is, I know, going to do a great interview. He's going to speak with him this weekend. Is this whole question of President Trump as a subject of their investigation? Because one of the things that we've spoken a lot about is the fact that the president was never given a heads up, not given a defensive briefing. The FBI says, oh, yes, we did, but it was really general. They weren't telling him that they were actually concerned that there were a couple people in his campaign that might be a problem. Now they're saying on page 55, Bill Presapt of this report says the reason we didn't tell candidate Trump when we talked to him and briefed him was because essentially we thought he was a subject of investigation. James Comey told him 3 times he was not a subject of investigation. How do you square that?
Well, when Devin and Paula and I went to the DOJ and we asked them that very question, did you give a defensive briefing to candidate Clinton? Did you give a defensive briefing to candidate Trump? The FBI's explanation was yes, we gave one to candidate Trump, but because a target of our investigation, in this case Michael Flynn, was sitting right beside him, we couldn't give him the full, exhaustive briefing we wanted to. So, of course, the follow-up question is, all right, well, the next day when you called him and said, we want to meet with you alone, or better yet, your former United States Attorney Chris Christie, who's on your campaign, we'd like to talk to him. What was the response then? They never went back, Martha. So,
they didn't want him to know. They clearly didn't want him to know.
But it's worse than that. They sent not a debriefing specialist. They sent an agent who was working on Crossfire Hurricane. They viewed it as the interrogation of a subject, not the defensive briefing of a candidate. So, again, I like Michael Horowitz. You know that. I've said it a million times. But if that's not a bias, that you would send an agent and not a defensive briefer, that you would not follow up and say, look, we need to talk to you, but we don't want anybody else around. I mean, if this is really about protecting the Trump campaign from Russia.
Protecting that, you thought that now they keep saying, well, the next campaign's in so much trouble, we got to make sure we impeach the president right away. But when they had an opportunity to stop something that they were very concerned about, they let it roll and roll and roll. It wasn't happening, but they thought it was at that point. One other point I want to get to with you is this question of compromat, because everybody remembers this very scary thing that we were all told, that the president, because of this, salacious, terrible, gossipy thing that happened supposedly at a Moscow hotel, that the Russians had that on the president and that he was compromised, and that if he became president of the United States, they were going to have something that they could hold over him, and that obviously would be very dangerous. Tell everybody where this little story came from.
It came from a conversation in a bar. I probably spent more time in bars than you have, but there are a lot of lies. A lot of lies are told in bars. So this rumor, if it even rises to the level of a rumor, is repeated in a bar. The person who hears it doesn't even believe it. They just think it's just talk, just rumor mongering.
Jest, they said.
It is corroborated, according to the FBI, by none other than Sidney Blumenthal, because his reputation for authenticity and trustworthiness is just legendary. So that's Clinton's right and left hand corroborates this rumor, and it winds up being in a dossier. So enough that Comey briefed Trump on it. So when you get to the point that a conversation in a bar can be used as part of the federal government's filing in a court proceeding, and you take no efforts to go identify whether or not it's true, again, I've been around President Trump, he's a germ freak. The thing in the Moscow hotel, that ain't happening.
And when they went back to the subsource, they said, did you Steele put this in his report, did you pass that along? And the source, according to the report, said he did.
Right. He didn't even believe it.
I didn't think he was going to put that in anything.
Right.
Why would he do that? Trey Gowdy, always good to see you.
Yes, ma'am.
To be continued. Thank you, sir.